Says somebody's recording now.
Yep. Good to have a contingency. Okay. Alrighty, I'll broadcast now.
Okay.
Thanks. Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us for Mastering Video Calls and Managing Remotely in an Online or COVID-19 World. A free webinar from IT Masters and Charles Sturt University. For those of you who aren't aware, IT Masters is a partner organisation to Charles Sturt University for whom we help develop and deliver online masters courses with them. We hope you are safe and well wherever you're joining from. There really isn't much that can be said about the gravity of the situation, I suppose, that hasn't already been said or wouldn't be sort of trite almost. The hope for this webinar is that we can help some people to deal with the necessary measures being taken around the world as best as possible. My name's Guy Coward. I will MC this webinar as I do all IT Masters free online short courses. On the panel are Brenton Birchmore and Chantel Hale, who I'll introduce shortly. First though, some housekeeping. We use Zoom for our webinars to encourage questions and the use of chat during the webinar. We ask that you direct all questions relevant to content covered in this webinar to the Q&A section. And you can send all other questions about tech support or any further information you need about anything to the chat, which is moderated by Hannah from IT Masters. And you can see the icons at the bottom of your Zoom window if you hover your mouse around there. You can also chat with your fellow attendees, and you can make that choice by toggling through the drop-down box once you've opened the chat log. The chat can be a useful tool for augmenting the discussion which we'll be having, or any discussion in any Zoom meeting, and it'll augment the discussion with insights from your experiences, and maybe you can help people with different experience levels catch up, or yeah, it's always a useful tool. We'll have Q&A sessions at the end of each topic, and if a question is particularly relevant, we'll just discuss it immediately. Hannah will chime in. All right, so this is our agenda. Theory and psychology of video communications is something that Brenton has talked about at great length in his lecturing, so he'll cover that. Practical work-life interactions with Chantel, as she's education manager at IT Masters and manages, I guess, mentors and lecturers. I've got a bit of experience with larger audiences, so I'll talk about, I guess, some of the considerations around these sort of larger meetings and some of the limitations with Zoom at least. And then we'll just open it up and have a nice broad panel discussion. Any further questions we can get to. We'll finish as close to the end of the hour as possible. Alrighty, so let's introduce the panel formally. If we go to the next slide, Brenton Birchmore is a senior MBA lecturer and subject designer. He's done a lot of short courses with us. And Chantel, as I said, is the education manager at IT Masters and incoming CEO. So congratulations, we only found that out very recently. I'm the study advisor, so I talk to a lot of potential students and sort of try and find a good fit for your objectives and I guess your purposes for studying, and see if we can work towards your goals. I also webinar the short courses, which is why I'm here today, I think. I'll let them introduce each other, or introduce themselves in more depth. So perhaps we'll start with you, Brenton.
All right, where's my mute button? There we go. Hello, folks. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Guy, for introducing all of this for us. We are hoping to pack some useful information for everyone today. My input here, my role is I do a lot of the subject design and delivery for IT Masters. One of those subjects is one we talk about as professional communications, which is a subject we've been running for quite a number of years, and it covers a whole range of things that are intended to help professionals deal with the trials, tribulations of expressing themselves, sharing information, achieving things. And we thought it was perhaps useful to take a piece of that and share some of those fundamentals, some of those rules regarding how video conferencing, video calling, video communications is working. Because most of us are needing to do a little more of this in recent times. So interestingly, you know, for people like us, we do a lot of, I mean, for me in particular, I do all of my work on this kind of thing because I'm not even in the same country as Guy and Chantel. I live in Singapore, but present to students all over the world. So we're trying to share a little bit of things that we all work with, and people like Chantel have to manage people like me who are always somewhere else. So we're going to go through some of the psychology. We're going to start off with this. I'll talk about some of the reasons why we have some challenges with doing video conferencing. And one of the first things I want to point out is that a lot of you, some of you at least, are already looking and thinking, hang on, what's that? What's that thing there? He's got some qualifications up there. Wonder what they are. Wonder what he studied. Hey, look, there's a Buddha. Is that a Buddha? Is that a Buddha? Oh, look, he's moved. There's a picture of, is that Einstein up there? There's a monitor over there. It's facing backwards. I wonder why it's turned around. Yeah. So this is all going on at some level in your consciousness. Now, give me a second.
Good of Brenton to give us a really good practical demonstration here. While he does that, just because he's jumping into it, Brenton, you're jumping into this, I take it.
I did. Did I not? Was I not supposed to?
You did. I thought quickly I'll introduce myself before you jump into it and while you're setting that up. Sorry about that.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm Chantel Hale, and you may hear background noise from me because while Brenton's doing the full-on professional thing and that sort of thing, I'm doing what an online meeting from home is. And there's somebody in the kitchen doing something, and that's fine. We'll talk about that a little bit later after Brenton's done his full-on professional presentation.
So now everyone can only look at the picture in Chantel's background for their curious mind as to what's going on. So the reason I did that, and my apologies, Chantel, I did breach a point of etiquette in not introducing or inviting Chantel to introduce herself as part of this, because this is a co-presentation. So I went into my habit, which is a good thing to talk about because we are driven by habits. And my habit, because I do a lot of these webinars, I just jump straight in because I'm not normally co-presenting. So I just did something then that's an example of me functioning from habit. And the reason we function from habit is because that's the easiest, least stressful thing to do. But occasionally it's not the most effective thing to do. And a lot of the time we need to recognize the difference between what we can do that is against our habits that we should try and breach. We should try and change them. So I've just popped a screen up behind me, and I did that to hopefully demonstrate within your minds and ideas that what specifically happens to you with your mind and what you're looking for. You're looking for information about me. You're not just visually curious. You're not visually bored. You're looking for something that helps you understand me and what I'm saying. So it's often difficult. You can't help yourself from looking at things around the background. I mean, one of the worst things I could possibly have behind me would probably be something like a bookshelf. Now, if you're in an environment where you don't have a lot of choice, then you have to work within those limitations. But the part of this discussion today is to help you understand what is the impact, what is the effect of some of those things that we might not notice are a little different. So we'll go through some of the things of why this is difficult in ways that we don't necessarily realize. And the mechanisms that we use, the way we communicate, is always still relevant to us, even if we can't have them. Scott's saying, just jumping into see Scott's question, see a PowerPoint, so nothing behind. Can you see my picture? Can you see my talking head?
Yeah.
You guys see that? Okay. Some people can't see me. Guy, do you have a suggestion for that? Is there a technical thing why some people can't see me and some people can?
It might be in the view options in Zoom. I've got an option to hide video panel, so I imagine a few people have an option to show video panel. So it's next to you are viewing Brenton Birchmore's screen.
Right, thanks. See, that's why we have the technical experts involved here. It's fantastic. All right, let's go through some of the points that I want to share with you. If you imagine back millennia ago, before we had writing, humans communicated only verbally. We only had face-to-face. And then at some point we invented writing as a way of communicating over long distances and over an elapsed period of time. We had to figure out how to convey as much as we wanted to convey in a face-to-face verbal exchange, but we had to figure out ways to do that with written words that we know were significantly less effective. So if you think about all of the rules that we evolved in the use of language in a written format, so all of the grammar, all of the punctuation, all of the things that exist within written language that help us understand that, every bit of that came into being because we were trying to substitute what we used to get and still get, but what we needed to get from face-to-face interactions. So that's a primal human need. When we're dealing with video conferencing, we have the same needs. We are, as humans, subconsciously always looking for something that helps complete the interaction. So we still need those subtle individual cues. Now we know body language is complex, and we know that the way in which we speak is something that makes a difference. And we know that, for example, if we're just writing an email, our tone of voice doesn't carry. But if we're talking to someone, we can use our tone of voice. We can use the cadence and rhythm of our voice as part of our personality. So the message there is that when we're always looking for those extra clues, if we are aware of that, when we sit down in front of a camera, or we sit down in front of, or get on a call, we need to be aware that if we want to convey that understanding, we need to substitute some of that signal, some of that message that's going to come from other means. Now, with the video conferencing, obviously the only tool we have to convey any visual component of us personally is the camera. So we need to use that as a tool. The camera isn't there just to supplement, to make us feel more connected. It's there as a tool to help us convey understanding. So we need to use it if we're the one doing the presenting or giving the information or talking to someone. And if we don't use it, if we underuse it, or if we misuse it, or if we don't pay enough attention to it, then we might actually undermine or damage the extent to which we can be understood. We might actually do more harm to the communications, because the people that are listening to us, the people that we're interacting with, they're going to be looking for all those additional cues. What do we really mean? So let's look at one thing that we always, the simplest translation of understanding is that a recipient is wanting to know two things when we're communicating with them. What did we mean, and what does that mean to them? So the first challenge we need to make sure that we are dealing with is we help others know what do we mean. And if that means we help them by making sure that they can clearly understand our tone of voice, if we help them by making sure that they can see our facial expressions and the body language that we have within whatever this frame that we have here, that's going to add to their ability to understand what we mean. So our goal is an exchange of understanding. A lot of the time we take for granted when we are in a working environment that we are more tuned in to the conversations than we would perhaps realize that we are. And one of the reasons for that is because one of the things that happens when we're in a particular environment is our brain decides not just what to tune into, but what to tune out. So the reason we might take our meeting to a meeting room instead of having a one-to-one standing in a corridor is because it mentally allows us to stop thinking about other things. And if we're in a home environment, that challenge is persistent. So knowing that, being aware of that, means that we want to, as a participant, make sure that we are doing our best to tune in and pay attention to the conversation by tuning out everything else. But we also want to help that other person be able to tune out everything else. Now, you might not have one of these whiz-bang screens to put behind you, but you might have a reasonably blank wall to use, which would be a good substitute. So our goal is narrow the focus by removing other sources of curiosity from both ourselves and from what the audience can engage with. That means that as much as we can, we want good lighting, because we want the person to be able to see us clearly. We don't want them to be wondering what really do we have, what are we looking like? We want to make sure that we are aware of the field of view. So if we have a camera that's all the way back, I'm going to pull this one back a little bit. I pull this back. So now you're seeing me in a different light. You're seeing me, your upper body, torso. I can now use my hands in the conversation if that's what I want to do. If I zoom in, you're now focused just on the talking head. You've now got a different involvement in the conversation. So you can use these things. You can use the angle of the camera to some extent. Some of you will think, well, my camera is down there and there's not much I can do about that. Well, that's probably true, but there might be somewhere where you can reposition. I have a box on the desktop where you can put a laptop up and change the angle so that the camera is more effective. Now, some of you are thinking, well, we're just sort of doing this for a little while and maybe it's not such a big deal. Well, every single communication that you have will be improved if you could improve these elements of how it works. Another thing with background sounds, for example, Chantel mentioned background sounds, and we know that if we're working from home, there's an acceptability that there'll be some background noises. But what we need to be aware of is that all voices, all sounds will come through at the same volume through the microphone. So as a human, our ears are able to give us a directional guidance. We can turn to face someone, and the way our brain processes the information from two different ears, different times, and the way our ears are shaped allows us to listen to one thing even when there's background noise around us. A microphone doesn't have that ability. So if we haven't allowed background noise to occur around us, we need to be aware that it's probably coming through at a volume that is competing with our own voice. So if we can't do anything about the background noise, then we can't. But if we can, then there's value in doing that because it will dramatically impact the way in which what we say is understood. And our face is all that we have, or all that we have left in our body language. So there's a lot of value in having a camera that's facing us. I mean, I'm looking at you. So if I'm looking at you, I'm looking at the camera. If I'm speaking and I want you to engage with me, I'm going to look at the camera. If I look at the picture of me, I'm looking over here. Now I'm going to talk here for a second, and I want you to imagine how much difference does this make to you as the recipient to think, okay, who's Brenton talking to? Is he really talking to me? Am I really tuned in now? Am I getting the same thing from him? Right? Or I could look at the app. I could look at the presentation. So now I'm looking at the presentation. I'm looking at my slide deck, and that's where I'm focusing my attention. Now, when we're looking at a group of people, we might think, well, those pictures are all there of those people, so I can see them. That's right. If you're the audience, if you're in audience mode, look at all the pictures. If you're in speaker mode, if you have the floor and you're the one talking, then talk to the camera, because then you're talking to the other people. And the ability for you to transfer your understanding will be significantly higher. You'll get a lot more across. People will engage with you. And if you also stop all of the background noise that you can, then they will have nothing else to hear but you, and nothing else to see but you, and they'll have your eye contact. So some quick points on video etiquette. Be prepared to use visuals and be prepared to use the camera. It is usually significantly helpful. A lot of us will say, oh, we don't have a camera. If you don't have a camera, you just don't have one. If you don't have one today, if it's not working, that's always fine. We are, as a society, quite accepting of that. But when you can, as you can, if you can, make use of it because it's a valuable tool. Use the camera as eye contact. That's what it is. So you can use it to look at that person by looking at the camera. You can also use your mute button when you're not on the floor. If you're not the one speaking, use your mute button to make sure that your background noise isn't disturbing other people's conversation. And being present and being involved means this isn't an opportunity. Just because you can on the side do something else doesn't always mean you should. That's something that we should look at as not so much from an opportunistic point of view. Here's a chance for me to double task and do something else, but is this actually going to achieve the right outcomes? If I do it, maybe they will do the same thing. If I appear to not pay attention, should I really expect them to pay attention to me when I want them to? So we know that we'll always be quite forgiving because we're at the beginning of this journey of helping people to use and work with these video conferencing situations. But this is not going to be a brief scenario. Most of us would agree that we are probably going to be using these tools to communicate and work for weeks, perhaps months, to some extent. There will be times when it'll get lighter and easier and less of it, but we're going to need to use these as a complete replacement for a period of time that makes it worthwhile investing in these details and investing in the good habits that we need.
All right, I've got a couple questions, Brenton, if I can throw them your way.
Let's.
Yep. So a question from Timothy. He says, is using a virtual background in Zoom a good option to remove background distractions?
It absolutely can be, but it depends on whether or not it is less or more distracting. So it depends on the choice of the background. It's a comparison. So thinking of the problem, which is obviously thinking about it, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. Is this background better? If yes, then it depends on what's behind your camera at the moment, but it could well be helpful.
I've often found that I find it more distracting because bits of you get cut off, and if you don't have a clean background behind you, it then becomes more of a distraction, I think, because bits of you get cut off. So that's my 2 cents on that. It's very fun if you're having a fun Zoom meeting, but if you're just having a normal meeting, it's probably more distracting than it is worthwhile.
I think we all saw that picture of that lady who got stuck as a potato in her MS Teams meeting, and she didn't know how to make herself not a potato. So that might be a bit awkward.
That's like arriving to a meeting with the wrong hat on and you can't take it off. It's kind of awkward.
But Malcolm does ask, and perhaps Chantel, you'd be good to answer this one. I've seen people on Zoom with these different backgrounds. How do we do that? Is that something that's within the scope of this meeting?
It's very quick to do. If you have video on, which you guys can't do because it's a webinar, not a meeting, but if you have video on, there's a little button next to the stop video button where you can click choose a virtual background. It's very fun. It's very unnecessary in professional meetings.
Thanks.
Oh, we have another quick question from Iwan. He says Teams also has an option to blur. I think Zoom has a very similar option. Is that recommended?
So my short answer is all of these tools are just tools. The answer is going to depend on what is visually more effective. So if you go back to, I just need to reduce the sources of visual curiosity, the answer to the question is, does it do that? And if the answer is yes, then it can be useful. And if the answer, as Chantel says, actually creates more curiosity, then it might be counterproductive. But that's where you find the answer from asking that question when you see the visual comparison.
Right, we might wrap up with one more question for this part. I've got a question from Albert. He would like to know if using a drop back of your firm in a Zoom meeting, is that appropriate, and would that cause distraction at all?
So if we're talking of an image backdrop, if that's what's being talked about, then that could be a contextual anchor to contextually include that person in that's the environment, that's the context I want to present myself as. That is doing a similar job as what you would see with newsreaders on television who have a particular video screen behind them that is meant to convey a contextual background. That's the job it does. So again, it comes to the choice of the image. If you choose an image that does that job, it can be useful, but you don't want a complicated image that draws people's curiosity to it. Should we run the poll?
Yes, that's a good idea. But while we're doing that, so Brett has asked, why is a virtual background unprofessional? I don't understand the connection between having a clean professional background image and unprofessionalism. Surely it's what's more professional is having a wardrobe behind you. And I totally see where you're coming from there. And yes, having a wardrobe behind you is probably not ideal. The thing that gets to me about unprofessional is whenever you use a virtual backdrop, unless you have a clean white wall behind you or a clean white sheet, you end up with the virtual backdrop cutting into you and being more distracting than it is professional. It does depend on the situation. And I mean, in a lot of situations, and I will talk soon about the difference between certain meetings, certain meeting types. In a lot of situations, it's fine. It's a great addition, but for many situations, having a virtual backdrop cut into your cheek or something because you're the same color as the background in certain areas just creates more distraction than it's worth, I think.
Okay.
I think, sorry, just jump in. There's two questions I think being looked at is what is professionalism and what is effective communications? And they're two different questions. Pardon me. The first point is what's a visual distraction and is that undermining the person's ability to concentrate on the message? That's purely functional. And the question of, well, which background is more professional is a different thing. That's contextual. So you might have two different questions to ask that before you find the right decision as to what to put behind you.
All right, and speaking of visual distractions, many of you will be able to see a poll asking, what do you find hardest about video communications? About 56% of you have voted so far. And just for your reference, there's 325 people in this Zoom meeting at the moment. And a fairly even spread, apart from an overwhelming, I guess, winner, distractions. 50% find distractions the hardest thing about video communications.
So I just want to talk to that point for a second from what we just covered. Part of the awareness of the distractions is because we are not getting the information that we are used to getting as part of the communications. The distraction is because our mind is subconsciously looking for the additional cues, the additional information, the additional flow of exchange that isn't there. And part of the distractions comes from the fact that the exchange is incomplete. So if we make it more complete, we will make it less distracting for others. If it's distracting for us, if we see things that are distracting, people are doing things that are distracting to us, then we're doing the same thing to them. So if we all reduce the things that we learn are distracting, we will make the exchange more complete, and then we will all be able to focus on it more effectively. So that's one part of the distractions. But Chantel, you might also talk about the environmental distractions of doing it from a living room or something like that, because there's another side to it, right?
There absolutely is. And that's part of the reason I am doing it from a living room, because most people don't have a dedicated study. And it's forgivable, obviously. A lot of us live in a house that has, you know, some bedrooms, a living room, a dining room. It's very open concept, you know, that sort of thing. Distractions are just part of life when you're online meeting. The trick is to minimize them as much as possible, and also to understand when other people have them. Is it time for me to share my screen and we'll go from there?
Yeah, why don't I hand over to you and you go from there?
Yeah, and just for everyone who might not be able to see the poll, using the tech was 16%, observing etiquette 19%, distractions 48%, camera invasion 11%, and overuse 6%.
Great. So I'm going to talk a bit more about the practical application of all of this. Brenton has been teaching communications for years. I've been meeting with our online mentors and people for as long, basically. I've been the IT Masters Education Manager for a while now, and we have about 15 mentors working for us throughout the year. I've met less than half of them in person. We do a lot of online meetings. Brenton and I, because Brenton teaches so many subjects for us, we're always on Slack together and we jump into Zoom meetings all the time. I have a decent amount of experience managing dispersed teams and working with people who are all located somewhere where I can't get to. It's important to have some understanding of how video conferences work. And I thought I would start with a little bit of the common challenges. The biggest one I've found in video conferencing is when you have more than a few people in there, whose turn is it to talk? Having the camera on helps with this a lot. So if you have a camera possible, please turn it on where possible so that people can see you go, oh. And if you are in a Zoom meeting, or if you're in a meeting that gives you the option to, when you've got all the faces on the screen, have the gallery view on, or the view that allows you to see all the faces at once at the same size, not the one that focuses on the person talking, because often it just focuses on whose mic is making the most amount of noise. So the big thing with whose turn it is to talk is if people have videos, that's a way to solve that quite easily. If people don't have video cameras, which is, as Brenton said, is understandable, sometimes you don't and you just have to deal with that. One of the ways is, unfortunately, raising your hand, like you're in primary school again or whatever. Having somebody who's chairing the meeting have the ability to say, okay, listen, Guy had a question. It's time for, let's do that. Again, it's like normal meetings where you don't always know who's missing out on a chance to talk, but it is something to consider when you're meeting because it makes it a bit harder. Miscommunication. Brenton was talking about you've only got what's in this video screen as your communication tool to see what's going on. A big one there is the email afterwards saying, this is what we agreed on, I think, you know, just confirm whether this is true. To look at people's video, I know Brenton was saying you have to look to the camera, and that is really handy when you're speaking, but also look at people's video so that you can see if they make a face where, you know, you suggest something and you're like, okay, actually this is not a good suggestion. Being open to it, and again, sometimes putting your hand up and saying, this is not my understanding. You'll get the big one of tech doesn't work. And there's a few reasons, a few ways to solve this. The testing out of meetings is really important. If you've never been in this sort of meeting before, you should contact somebody and say, hey, can we test this out and make sure that my internet connection is worth it, that is working, that I know how to mute myself and unmute myself, I know what's going on there. That's a really hard one to solve sometimes, and a lot of it is trial and error. If you can't test it out, somebody asked on the Facebook page when we announced this webinar, one of the questions was, when do we join a meeting? I say 5 minutes before it starts. Often you'll be the only one in there, but if you can join it 5 minutes before it starts, it means you have a little bit of time to restart your computer if you need to, or to move the camera around, or to work out what's going on there. If your tech doesn't work, or if you're having internet connection issues, one of the first things you'll do is turn your video off. And you just apologize, say, listen, my internet's being sketchy today. I just have to turn my video off because audio is more important than video, unless, obviously, by Brenton, unless you can't speak, that's fine. That's a different issue. But for the most part, if you're having internet connection issues, the first thing you do is turn your video off. Audio issues, a lot harder to deal with. One of the big things is find a mic that's not your computer mic. I wouldn't suggest going out and buying a fancy mic. Brenton has a fancy mic that makes him sound like a radio presenter, but I just have a headset. I know it looks dorky.
It's not the mic, Chantal.
It's the training. I know the headset looks dorky, but we're all in meetings. We're not YouTube presenters, and I'll talk about that in a second. We all understand it. It's most important that you cut out background noises, that you cut out unnecessary noises. And one of the things that will help with that is a mic that's near your mouth and not at your computer. Also means if you have to take notes, if you're using the computer mic, it will record the sound of you typing. I don't know if anyone's noticed that one. So moving forward.
With that one, even there's a lot of times, a lot of people's inbuilt mics, which we've noticed a few times, is if there's sound coming out of the laptop, the mic won't work. So they might be trying to say something and you just see them talking, but you don't hear anything. So that's one that I see a lot with the inbuilt mic as well. And I guess that covers a quick question we had as well, Chantel, about the camera. High quality camera or embedded camera, is that the same as the mic?
I'm a big believer in, I think in this situation, it's good if you have a camera, but we don't need to go overboard. Like I'm saying here, you're not a YouTube star. We don't need to be. We don't need the setup they have. You don't need Brenton's setup in the end because most of us can't get that white screen for the background. But if your camera is in a bad place, get a connected one. I might actually, as a horrible demonstration that I really wish I didn't have to do, I'll show you. I have my integrated webcam is at the bottom of my screen. So I'm just going to change it there. I never want to use that. No one wants to see that. So I have a different camera that just sits on the top of my screen. It's pretty cheap. It's not high quality. It does what it needs to do. But yeah, no one wants the upper nose cam. If you can get a connected, just a cheap little webcam, get something. It makes life easier.
Much like the virtual background though, Chantel, the bottom camera could be pretty good. for fun meetings and for personal stuff, and I guess that's important too. You know, so many of us are actually socializing using these sorts of forums. you know, there's going to be different rules and different contexts, as Brenton was talking about earlier.
Yeah,
Depends
and
how much time we spend on it too. You know, if you're only doing it every a few times a week, then maybe you don't need to invest. But most people should be able to get even one of these and a little webcam both together. You should be able to do that for less than $100 if you have the budget for that. Then and you're going to be doing this a lot, then that could be worth it for some people.
yeah. With headsets, I've included a picture of a headset here. There was just a picture that when I searched for it, get a headset with 2 ears so that you can cut out the distractions. If you've got one ear uncovered, you'll hear other sounds and it will distract your meeting. Home sounds are so different from work sounds. When I'm in the office, even when the office is quite quiet, there's still a decent amount of background noise that everything kind of covers each other. In the home, it's very different. There are basic standards of a meeting, even if you're not a YouTube star. Don't eat on a meeting unless, when we were meeting to discuss this whole presentation, Brenton was eating toast. And it was okay because we work together all the time. And he used the example, if we were in an office and walking into a meeting together, it was just me, Guy, and Brenton, he could eat toast. But for most meetings, don't eat on a meeting. No one wants to hear it. If you are going to eat or drink, make sure you're muted. If you need to blow your nose, if you need to cough, if you need to sneeze, make sure you're muted. No one wants to hear that. And because remember what Brenton was saying, it just puts all the noise into your actual mic and it all sounds the same, as opposed to if you sneeze in an office meeting, it's not quite as intrusive. Check your background. I just have some pictures. There's nothing offensive back there. You do remember that you're meeting with work people. You have to be dressed. You have to be wearing clothes. I would suggest not your pajamas, if possible. You don't necessarily have to be wearing a full suit. It depends on your office etiquette. I've been wearing a lot of yoga pants and no one can see it, and that's fine. But do cover yourself as if maybe the camera will fall or something like that, and it becomes a huge problem. Pretend the worst could happen, basically. And then sharing a clean screen is kind of important. If you're sharing a screen and it's got, you know, something in the background you don't want someone to see, it's not the same as if someone comes over to your computer to check something out when you're in the office. It's often recorded, it's a bit different. I usually, for big meetings, I close everything down so that I've closed my email down, for instance, here, so that people don't end up seeing, you know, the toast setup come up and it says, oh, you've got this email from somebody. Keep that in mind when you go to a meeting. But all of this does depend on the type of meeting you're having. Me and Brenton have one-on-one meetings all the time to discuss subjects and students and marking and that sort of thing. And that's usually, Brenton will Slack me and say, hey, I've got this question, can we chat? And I'll send him my Zoom personal meeting address and we'll just join in there. And it's a lot more relaxed than it would be a planned meeting where you have a calendar invite and there are 10 people in there. And you kind of use the same standards that you would use for normal meetings. If it's a meeting in the office where you would have dress up a little bit then. I know while I've been working from home, Brenton's seen me sitting on the couch quite a bit. That's fine, that's normal. He understands, but again, it does depend on the type of meeting and the relationship you have with the person you're meeting with. Moving to last one. So managing dispersed teams is one of those elements that you really should consider, because a lot of us are in a situation we've never been in before where we don't see each other at all. So you need to remember to sometimes catch up a little bit more than you would have, because if you're in an office, you can see if somebody's stressed out. You can see if somebody's having a really hard time meeting deadlines or there's something else going on. So you need to have more of those check-ins. You need to have a few group meetings. So we had a new staff member starting on Monday. It's really exciting, but it is hard to start a staff member remotely. So the admin team just met on Monday afternoon. We called it afternoon tea. Everyone brought their own snacks, which is one of those times where don't eat on camera is forgiven. I did mute myself anytime I had a bite, because the whole purpose was to meet the new staff member and to become comfortable with each other, and as a bonding activity. When you've sent a few emails back and forth or a few messages back and forth, it is time to sometimes bite the bullet and say, let's just catch up. Let's just speak to each other and make sure that there's no communication issues and that nothing's going particularly wrong. And remember to jump into a meeting when you normally would have been going over to someone's desk. I know some people can be really busy at the moment, but if you have the time, you can just be like, hey, I've got a few questions. If you're using Zoom, you'll have your own personal meeting room, which means that you have an address that you can send anytime and you can just chat quickly, and it often solves issues and makes you feel a little closer to your staff. Somebody had asked on the Facebook questions about employing people remotely or when you're not face-to-face. I've had Zoom interviews with, I think, all of our mentors. It's hard to test certain things, but you can then have that face-to-face. You can have extra people if you want to have a panel hiring. It's important then to have a video camera, even if it's a dodgy one down the bottom of your screen, so you can see faces. And then once they start, it is really important to have some sort of task management system to make sure that you're ticking off all the tasks, because they don't have the ability to just look confused and you to say, okay, I need to help with training a bit more here. And I asked Desiree, our operations manager, how the training of a new staff member who's just starting remotely is going. And she said one of the things that she really needed to focus on is making sure they're comfortable, because you have to ask it more because you can't see them. Making sure they know what's expected of them is a really important one, and just making it important to use your task management systems. And I think one last slide from me. When you are hosting meetings, and this is about technical limitations of meetings and important things to consider technically, you need somebody to use the host powers of meetings. In a Zoom meeting, whoever is the host or the co-host can mute people, they can turn video off for people, they can deal with those sort of things. And so one of the important thing there is we get a lot of people who don't realize there's some background noise happening, or that they've accidentally come unmuted or something. So if you are having a group meeting, especially if there's more than 4 or 5 people, whoever has host powers, and you can have multiple people with host powers, you need somebody willing to mute somebody who's having a lot of background noise. You can even just be like, oh, Brenton, I'm getting a lot of feedback from you. I've muted you until they can plug in the right mic or something like that. And turning off video when you think somebody hasn't meant to turn on video, or if the bandwidth is becoming an issue.
Chantel, would you equate that with the chairperson in a physical meeting? Is that the kind of thing that you're referring to?
It's similar to being the chairperson, but there is the element of it's just a technical thing sometimes. So the chairperson in an online meeting does need to do that thing where it's like, okay, we can table that for now and move on to the next topic. And also, oh, I think Guy wanted to say something, but he was cut off. But then that muting somebody who's making a lot of background noise, I often think you need somebody who's not busy chairing the meeting to be involved in that if you have a lot of people there. Because if you have, and I was on a Zoom meeting with 100 people recently, and you just needed someone with the ability to say, okay, this is the person who's making noise, and you can see it in the participant list. And whatever software you're using, you can usually see who's making noise. And if it's not the person who's speaking and you're getting a lot of background noise and they've got that little, the green mic on Zoom or a little whatever icon that means they're making noise, you should be able to mute them and say, sorry, I think we're getting some feedback from you. I think that's about it from me. It's time for questions, I'm sure.
All right, question time. We've built up some good questions for the end here. So I'll start with one by JL. Is it better to use a natural light or not show the face?
My thought is it's better to use your face where possible. I'm using natural light at the moment because my living room light is broken. I think it's fine.
I'm going to show you guys a difference. So you look, see how you see me now, and then I'm going to go and change. I'm going to close the curtain and show you what a difference is. Hang on.
Yeah, and unnatural lights can look weird, but I think it's really important to do something with it, to have your face where possible.
Yeah, you don't want to look like John Clark from Clark and Door videos when he was pretending to be someone else, the secret informer.
So I haven't changed any other lighting in the room. I've just closed the curtain. So I've just closed the side angle natural light that's coming in the window. And I'm now just using a light in front of me. And you can see me a lot clearer now. Although you can see the reflection on my glasses, you can see the light that I'm using. So that's an example of how strong side light can actually be a problem. Maybe sometimes a darker room, let the camera adjust to the lighting that you have, will give you a better view, a better view of yourself.
And I mean, from before, my point is we all understand that, again, we don't have professional makeup people and professional lighting. It's fine. There's a certain level of understanding that's just fine.
Awesome. So we'll look at some other ones. So let's see, this is an interesting question for Gurminder. Is it okay to record a meeting without permission?
I mean, that's an interesting thing. I automatically record my meetings, but I usually just say, hey, listen, I'm recording this just for notes if we need it. I usually say it. And you can, in Zoom at the very least, see that something's being recorded. But I mean, I'm not too stressed about it, but it depends on the person. And if a person ever said to me, hey, I don't want to record this, or it seems like it would be a delicate situation, I'd turn recording off.
Great, thank you. And
so I would just jump in to say that I don't think it's okay to record against permission. If someone asks for it not to, then I think that is a mistake to then record it. I think you can go by company policy. You can have a policy of always recording. You can have an expectation of recording because people can see it. But if they ask for an unrecorded conversation, that should nearly always be acceptable.
Great. We have another question just about mobile phone usage on Zoom. Is it unprofessional to use your camera on Zoom when you're on the mobile phone? Obviously, as positioning can get a little bit harder when you're on the phone.
I don't think it's unprofessional. I think it depends on the positioning. If you're holding it down here, then it's obviously just going to be up your nostrils, and that's a bad idea. But if you can position it properly, it means you can join the meeting appropriately as needed.
It's not the device, it's how it's used. Same with the cameras, what Chantel was talking about before. It's not necessarily the device, it's how it's used and positioned.
Awesome.
And also about considerations of how often you're going to use it, how long you're going to be needing to use it for, what training is necessary, and I guess the cost of benefit of ensuring people are confident on these tools, have the proper access to the materials they need.
Yep, that's it. And then on that topic, we spoke about where to look at the camera, but where should the camera be positioned? That's a question we've got a couple times now.
As close to in front of your eye line as you can. So you have the thing, if I had the camera down and I could put it on the desk, I'd be looking down at you and everyone would know that I'm looking down upon you. And that's a subtle body language cue that says I'm above you. Similarly, you don't want it too high. A direct eye-to-eye level contact is the ultimate place if you have that choice.
I obviously don't have that choice properly. I've tried to position my camera as best as possible. It wouldn't point down for long enough and it would move and go out of focus. And I'm like, this is fine, this will do. And for most people in meetings, this is fine, this will do.
And I'm one of those people that needs to go out and buy a webcam because I am now working from home, whereas before I did not. And also I think, you know, if I'm going to be doing more of these kinds of webinars as opposed to where I'm just the MC and perhaps facilitating someone else's lecture, for example, perhaps if I'm communicating, it's better to do it with the video, whereas normally I haven't.
Cool. And looking at some other questions, this one's a overall question. What are some of the issues that you've found using Zoom?
Probably a good segue into the next slide. Chantel, I've only got one slide, so if possible, could we just go straight there? And this is about managing larger audiences.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so as we've seen in even just the chat and the questions here, there's a lot of questions about how to use Zoom. And a lot of it can sort of come back to the, I guess, the distraction chat, because the distraction talk from Brenton earlier. People don't know how to use the chat. People don't know how to disable the chat if they don't like it, if they want to, I guess, remove the distraction. The only thing I would say is get yourself familiar with whatever platform you choose to use in this time. Honestly, it's about spending the time to do it and using the right, searches in Google and that sort of thing. Broadly speaking, with tech issues, technology limitations of video comms, it could well be the case that we just don't all have the same quality tools. As Chantel was saying, you might need to turn video communications off for some people. Some people might need to do that in order for them to effectively communicate, because otherwise they're just going to come across sounding like a robot. General rule is video is the one that'll take up the most bandwidth, then audio, then text. So it might be the case that if you have a large workforce, for example, a large group of stakeholders that you need to talk to, then it is just best to do it via email if you can't get the tools necessary and if no one has access to them. You'd have to make those sort of commercial decisions for yourself, I assume. The benefit is clearer communication, is ability to, I guess, maintain as much as possible a sort of business as usual approach. But if you can't do it, then you will need to change your systems. I guess the biggest thing that changes though when you have a larger audience is, well, first of all, let's talk about when to have a larger audience. When do you have a meeting versus when do you have a big webinar, and what are the differences in, I guess, the dynamic there. For something like this, it would be really unwieldy to have a meeting. We'd have, what have we got? We still got 300 plus people in here. If we had 300 videos, if we had 300 people with the ability to turn their mic on and off, it would just get relatively chaotic relatively quickly. I think in any sort of context, regardless of the, I guess, the homogeneity of the crowd and how well versed they are in the etiquette of the meeting that you're having, it's just too big. So when you want to communicate to a large group of people, perhaps a security holders meeting or an annual general meeting or something like that, or to communicate to hundreds of students at once, or hundreds of people who are just interested in improving their comms now in this climate, these are the sorts of times you have the larger meetings. And Zoom, for example, and I'll only really talk about Zoom because that's the only group that I know about, have the option to have meetings for the smaller ones, for your smaller audiences, and webinars for your larger audiences. And the maximum number of people who can fit in a Zoom meeting is 1,000. But they also have the ability, if you want to have a group of people larger than that, you can stream it online on Facebook or something. You can record the webinar, and as we do for our short courses, and sort of keep it there for other people who can't make it at a certain time. So there's all sorts of ways around the limitations. Generally, it just sort of depends on what you're hoping to achieve, as to which way you'll go. I guess the important thing when you have a larger audience, though, and going back to that sort of the rules of etiquette, is you don't necessarily have the same familiarity and the same sort of intimacy with the people that you're talking with in that sort of context. Like as Chantel was saying, Chantel, Brent, and I can have a chat, and we all know basically what is expected, how the other person is going to behave, how we're going to behave. It's really important when managing a larger audience to give the information that they're missing, to give them clear rules of etiquette. I think that's why I think it's super important for the chair or MC to signpost. You need to have that introduction. You need to say, this is what we're going to be doing. This is who we are. This is why we're here. And then we'll say, well, this is why we allow the use of chat. It's distracting for some people, but we find that it's a really good tool to augment the discussion and to let people get what they need out of it. There's a trade-off there, but we say, this is the selection we have made, and this is why. Just setting the ground rules, making sure that people know why we're doing things, allows people to sort of then adapt to what they need. Large meetings, often you can sort of change the settings in according to who you're talking to. So it might be the case that you need a large meeting where everyone does have the ability to talk, or perhaps a large meeting where one person who is perhaps typing in particularly interesting questions, or it becomes very clear that there's someone that it would be really useful to get their insights. You can promote them to panelists. You can turn them into someone like Brenton and Chantel, who can just suddenly share their screen, share their video, share their insights, and yeah, sort of become be able to communicate something more clearly. There's also options for, if you need to sort of make a big decision with a group of people, you can have sort of polls or voting systems. You saw the polls, but you can use external websites to run a voting program, and you can share your screens, and it can all be done in live. You can all be done in real time. These are options for people. There's so much flexibility with this platform. You can basically do whatever you want. You're only really limited by your imagination, and that's how you keep people engaged. You come up with ideas, or you sort of do polls. You make sure that you've got people with, I guess, expertise and who are well prepared, like Brenton, to ensure that the content is engaging, that what they're talking about is going to be interesting, and then we work on using the tools on the platform that we use, whether it's Zoom or GoToWebinar or any other one, to keep people engaged and to keep people attentive, and maybe prevent them a little bit from getting distracted, because it is hard. I think that's about all I have.
We do have lots of questions if you want to answer some
Yeah,
questions.
go for it.
So this one question about network bandwidth issues and resulting in missed audio. Is there any tips for keeping that conversation flowing when there is those tech issues?
Yeah, as I said, making sure that if you are all sharing videos, that people stop sharing videos so that the audio is clearer, just free up some bandwidth. Other than that, if this is a situation that's going to be springing up a lot, boosting your hardware. And if that isn't an option, coming up with another solution. I don't know if you have more to add, Chantel.
And there are a few options for some, like Zoom meetings, and I know a lot of online meeting systems do now have the option you can call in. So if you're consistently having issues, particularly time-based, I know a lot of people have time-based issues whenever they join a meeting because their bandwidth is all being used at that time. Try calling in. I've had a few times where I think last time we had like a fun office meeting, which somebody had suggested in the comments. They do it weekly, and I think it's a good idea to have catch-ups or coffees or whatever. I think Guy turned on his terrible webcam, but he also called in because his audio was a bit sketchy with the webcam on. So if you are having consistent issues with audio, you can call in usually, and that works a lot more smoothly. It's just you don't have video.
I think another thing, if you're talking about a person who has bandwidth restrictions as the recipient, what you said before about minimizing unnecessary microphone issues, like muting everyone else, turning off other unnecessary videos at a certain point, might help someone who might be struggling with local bandwidth issues for them. So although they could call in and get it all that way as well, but it's just about what can you do to minimize bandwidth consumption. So video and unnecessary audio.
Great. We can look at some other questions with that one. So we had Sissy a while ago asked if we at all can show possibly quickly an interactive session such as a whiteboard session. Does Zoom have those capabilities?
It does, and I might just, this is a whiteboard here. I think maybe our co-hosts have the ability to draw on this as well. I know in a meeting you can definitely draw on people's screens if you turn that on, which is fine. You know, can be a really helpful way to do that sort of thing. Do you guys have the ability to draw?
I don't think so.
No. Again, that's
I do
a
not.
difference between the webinar
Webinars
and the meeting.
meeting.
Oh, in
Yeah.
a meeting we would we?
Yeah, the webinar is designed for, I guess, this more, I guess, hierarchical structure where there's people deciding what happens and what doesn't.
I've turned off sharing screen just so that we can continue the conversation with minimal distractions.
All right. We have another question, if that works. Protection, protection of the communication, so cybersecurity culture and protection from viruses, and obviously people are at home on their personal internets and things like that. What's the best way to go around that?
I would suggest the first place to start is the risk factor for the organization. So a lot of us are used to in the past having our meetings in coffee shops. If we're going to have a meeting in a coffee shop, we're probably not going to invest heavily in trying to lock down the security of some of those meetings. They are not necessarily highly sensitive. So we're probably going to rely upon whatever latent security might exist. And yeah, it's probably not perfect, but in a lot of those meetings, we're probably not going to worry, and we shouldn't worry on those meetings. And of other meetings that are important, well, yes, there are differences with what some technologies can offer different levels of security, but be aware of not being caught up in news hype, because there's a lot of things that people want to talk about. A lot of news cycles want to talk about things that are interesting in this space, and often things get blown out of proportion. So not all of the bad news is really that much of a concern for the average organization. So read through that. But there are still organizations that do offer higher standards of security. And if you're an organization that needs to sweep your boardroom for bugs every month, then you'll want to invest in something that is obviously gold standard for security. But for most of us, we need to be realistic about what risks are we needing to solve.
And it is also one of the things somebody mentioned, it's worth putting a password in your Zoom meetings. And we don't do that in our office, but it is worth noting that people can just jump in if they can guess the number, the connection number for your Zoom meeting. So if you are using Zoom and you're a little worried about it, you can add that feature there, requiring people to have that password.
Yeah, and the thing is that there's a lot of, I guess, opportunity for malicious actors, given everyone will be far more active online. And all of these companies are working to increase the security as bugs are found. Zoom, for example, had one a little while ago, and they've worked on that. They've squashed those bugs, so to speak. It's making sure that you have good risk management processes in place and are following up on them as things change, particularly in a business perspective. Privately, it's a good question. It's up for you to decide as to what you have available in a public forum.
Many of us will probably find that those bad actors probably have more interesting targets to aim for than us usually. So there's a lot more going on. So there's a lot more of a herd instinct, and in some ways these things are all still relevant to risk factors, whether they make it higher risk or lower risk. So we need to balance it all out and make the right decision.
So it is past 1:30 now, so maybe we just have not many more questions, just so that people can
yeah, we've got 4 questions to go. Most of them should hopefully be able to answer quite quickly. If that's fine with you, does that work? Awesome.
Yep.
So we have a question from Rudy. How do you help the non-techno working from home person who doesn't really understand why Zoom might not be working, whether it's internet issues or bandwidth issues or whatever it might be?
A fun one there is, like most people aren't great at troubleshooting Zoom when they first start using it. Again, the testing is really important, just testing it out and seeing what's going on. If you are getting an error and you don't know what it is, try Googling it, is one of the big ones. And if there's a tech guy at your office who would solve these problems, if you can call him and say, what's going on? Can you help? That usually can solve some of the problems.
I think one of the analogies that I often use is think of internet as being like water through a pipe. If you've got all the taps on in the house, then you're probably not going to get as much water pressure out of the one that you're using. So your first thing, if you've got bandwidth issues, is check to see who else is using it at that point in time, who's doing what. Someone's watching YouTube or something, that will be a drain on the resources. This is the reason we talked about, maybe you need to turn off your video locally. If you also, where is your Wi-Fi outlet and where is your device? Is it behind a wall, around a corner? Is there a signal issue? And these sorts of things, if we work on them just to maximize it, some of us will still have internet connectivity struggles, but those are the sorts of things that can sometimes be the simplest top 3, top 4 things that'll help.
Awesome. We'll move on to the next one with that one then. Someone anonymous would like any tips for walking meeting with video options, for example, when having a one-to-one meeting.
Don't think I've ever done that one. I think that you'd have to use your mobile phone for that, right? Is that?
I'd assume, or potentially your personal meeting room if you really needed just that one-on-one with a video option.
Yeah, I use the personal meeting room all the time for just a quick meeting with people. It's in my Slack subtitle now, so that people can just jump in if they need to.
Yeah, and that's a easy one.
Yeah, and it sort of just replaces, the walking to someone's desk and saying, "Hey, I got this weird question," or "Got this weird situation."
Yeah, but it's heaps easy to start. You don't have to set a time or anything. You just copy the link and paste it through and just wait in there for the other person to turn up.
Yeah.
Always good to ask first, though.
Yeah, Brenton will Slack me and he'll just be like, "Hey, I've got a question. Do you have time?" And I'll send him the meeting link and he'll jump in and I'll jump in and it'll be good.
Yeah, great. That's good. So moving on, we've got a question from Ismail. Any experience of virtual meetings with simultaneous language interpretation? I'm not sure this is something we've ever come across.
Sorry,
I've
never had it.
I haven't used it personally, but I've seen it used. I know Microsoft has some pretty powerful tools with Skype and Teams that can do this. I've not used it for myself, but I think it's at that stage where the tech is actually probably far better at it than most of us would believe, but we just haven't engaged with it and used it. I do think that it's something that is very effective and it can be very useful. I haven't used it, but so that's basically the answer is you'll need to overcome those knowledge hurdles. But I would encourage you to look into it. I do think there are answers. I do think there are tools, and they're probably worth finding. If you need to communicate cross-language, do some hunting around. Maybe start with what Microsoft is doing, but others are doing it as well. You may find some good answers.
Awesome. One last question, we'll wrap it up, from Stephen. Is there a view on whether to use chat for back-channel conversations during a video meeting?
I don't love it. It's kind of like the idea you're in a meeting and two people start having a conversation outside the presentation. I think possibly back-channel chat should be left till after the meeting as a way to be polite to the presenters.
There is something I've come across with the chat as well. If you are doing back channel chat, if you're the one to download and share the chat log, your back channel chat, will be shared to everyone else. So that will be downloaded if you're the one downloading the chat log and sending it out. So
chat logs are a thing, right? So that's a first caution red flag for back channel chat, because even though, as Hannah says, you might not be the one who is getting that sent, that doesn't mean that there isn't a recording of it somewhere. And so we should never be doing and saying and sharing things on back channels that we would consider private and personal, because there could be part of a log somewhere. I agree with Chantel. It's a breach of etiquette. You're in a meeting. If you're in a meeting with 50 people and you're only there for a short bit of it, then you might still want to be productive with other things. You might be communicating with other people. But if that's the case, well, then should those two people be there? If you are there but you're bored, then maybe the meeting is too long. The meeting is poorly structured. The meeting should be broken up. There's usually always a reason for it that can be solved another way. And back-channel comms is usually a symptom rather than a good thing to do.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much, Hannah, for putting those questions to us. And thanks everyone for sending them in. Really useful chat. I suppose we've kept people far too long. We've lost about 100 people so far. So thanks for those of you who have been able to stick around. I guess, yeah, I'd just like to reiterate what I said earlier. I'm so glad that... What have we got here? What do you got there, Brenton?
I'm just answering Oliver's question. They're Audio Technicas. These are headphones that specifically have these things which provide padding on the head so that they're not pressing on my ears. So they're actually quite comfortable to wear for long periods of time. I forget the model number, but look up Audio Technica, and any other brands have them as well. They're fantastic to wear for hours at a time. Spares your ears.
This is why Brenton is such a professional communicator, because he invests in the tools. It's wonderful.
All the gear, no idea, right?
Oh dear. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for hanging around. Thank you, Hannah, for looking after the chat and moderating the questions. And Chantal and Brenton, it's always a pleasure hearing your insights. Stay safe, everyone. Yeah, I can only reiterate, it's a weird old time. We'll hopefully all work together to make the most of it. I might leave it to Chantal and then Brenton to sign us off.
Thanks so much for listening. I'm sorry if I went off track or babbled for a bit. We'll hopefully do some more of these one-off sessions at times when we have topics that are interesting or relevant. So post to the Facebook if you think of something like that. And thank you for listening.
And to answer Timothy's question, my mic is a C-1U USB microphone. It's about $60. It's USB driven, so it'll work on anything.
You can catch Brenton later on his shopping channel.
I don't know what brand it is, but I know it's
tech selling with Brenton.
Too much daytime TV.
I'm just answering the question. But thank you, everyone, for your questions, your comments, your chiming in. And thank you again to co-hosts Guy and Chantal and Hannah for all those awesome question wrangling. And we'll have to be back and maybe share some new stuff with you guys in the coming weeks or days. So tune in again next time and hope to see you again soon. Thanks very much.